Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, I'm going to have a Democratic and a Republican lawmaker on. I'm going to find a way to get them to agree on something. You don't want to miss that. But first, we have a couple of Pennsylvania's leading reporters. We're going to look at Senator Santorum's exit from the race, and what about that photo ID law? We'll be back in a moment.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back. Well, Amy Worden, who is often a guest, says it's the photo voter ID. Isn't that a lot, Amy? That's a lot to get out. Amy Worden joins me. She's with the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Mary Wilson with Pennsylvania Public Radio. You know, why don't we just start with that photo voter ID? Mary, you need a photo. Is that right on this ID? Is that the way it is?
True, unless your religious affiliation prohibits you from getting your photo taken. There was an interesting article in the Patriot News about that really recently. But yes, photo ID.
You need a photo ID, but we did have this bit with a couple of stories about the Amish. The Amish don't vote, by the way.
Yes,
but they're, huh?
Actually,
they do?
Yes, they do.
Uh-oh,
yes,
Amy's breaking news.
Republican, 2004, George Bush went after the Amish vote.
Yeah, but
actually.
Generally they don't vote. You agree with that? You agree?
Yeah.
Uh-oh, Amy's not conceding to this. Okay. But at any rate, Mary, when you go and if you're in a plain community, let's say, and you don't have ID, you have to go through a series of questions, 7 or 8 questions. Is that right?
Oh, I'm not sure so much about the plain community.
Yeah, well,
You're nodding.
Amish.
No, I understand that. I understand that. What I focused on was just what you would need to get an ID if you didn't have one yet.
Okay, well, what do you need if you don't?
Well, you need to go to PennDOT and get one, and you need all the documentation that would allow you to get a photo ID. So that starts with like your birth certificate.
I get it.
And the big cry about this being unfair, difficult, like a burden for people is what if you can't find your birth certificate?
And you have to pay some money if you go to a courthouse to get these documents, right?
Right. I mean, the law now provides free non-driver photo ID from PennDOT. Okay, but that cost will be borne by taxpayers in the millions of dollars. But here's the catch: in order to get that ID, you have to have your birth certificate and your Social Security card, and also 2 forms of sort of evidence that you live where you say you live.
Yeah, what we're talking about is that on April 24, when you vote, there's kind of a test going on. They're not going to deny you to vote without the photo voter ID, but you're going to have to show one, but they'll let you vote. But next fall, when you vote, you've got to show one, and if you don't have one, am I both of you right, then you can vote provisionally. Go ahead.
You can fill out a provisional ballot. You've got, I think it's 6 days to come back and return with your correct ID.
But the point about this is that we now know there's some, without getting into whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, there are expenses to this, right?
Right, and we're not sure how big. We're not sure how many expenses. So the estimates range from, I think it was $4 million is what PennDOT is estimating it'll cost to provide free IDs to all those who need them. A liberal think tank has put out there this $11 million estimate. Okay. And so, maybe truth is somewhere between the two.
I want to ask you about I want to ask Amy about the court case. But before I do that, I want to go to another aspect of this. I'm on a college campus. The Franklin and Marshall College students, let's say they live in Massachusetts, that driver's license won't work here. We have a photo ID, but it doesn't have an expiration date. So lots of campuses are going to have to reissue photo ID cards. Is that your understanding?
I'm not sure who's planning to reissue ID cards. And for a while, it seemed as though commissioners, directors of elections, were actually unsure if there was going to be some exception made. And they were actually planning to write to the state secretary and ask, can these IDs work? We've got an issue date on these IDs, but there wasn't.
So the point is, they will at the moment. It could be that they're going to need an expiration date on it. So let's say they came in 2010. If you're in college, it might be the expiration date 2014. But the point is, there are more colleges don't have expiration dates than do. I think Penn does, and Lehigh does. Franklin and Marshall doesn't. I think Penn State doesn't. Right. So that still is a cost, yes or no?
I think
it'll be a cost to the college and university, right?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
All right. Now, let's talk about this business. Democrats opposed to this, Republicans mostly for it. We end up in court, or we're going to end up in court. Talk about that, Amy.
Well, the rationale for having this law in the first place was to prevent voter fraud.
Right.
The one person, one vote, established provision. However, Democrats argue there's no evidence that there's been voter fraud. There has been registration fraud, but not fraud at the polls that anyone, including Governor Corbett, has been able to produce. So they say, first of all, the law has kind of upended the whole voting process in this state to a great cost.
Right.
And for what? So that's one argument, but that's not the argument they're going to make in court, which will be on constitutional grounds.
Right.
That it is in fact discriminatory, because the great burden of this, it's not a problem for those of us who drive, who are between the ages of 22 and maybe 70 and have jobs and for whom a driver's license is a regular thing and have credit cards and everything else. But there's a huge segment of the population
that does not.
And you're talking about largely urban voters, the elderly, the disabled. And that's a problem.
All right, we're going to run to a break. Santorum gets out of the race. How important is that? What's the future for Rick Santorum? We'll be back and try to figure that out.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, I'm back with Amy Worden and Mary Wilson, both journalists, and we're now going to switch gears, talk a little bit about, Mary, you've been covering Senator Santorum. He gets out. How big you went to Gettysburg when he said, I'm out, goodbye, at least for now. Well, how surprised.
And all these reporters just left the room. They're like, well, we got to find other work.
Is that, yeah, well, but go ahead. How surprised, and what do you think is going to happen now?
I was surprised. I think especially because it was in such contrast to the mood of an event I was at the week before. He came to Mechanicsburg, did some bowling, took some pictures, shook some hands, and one reporter said, so when are you going to get out of this race? He goes, I don't know how many times I have to answer this question, which I understand he was saying everywhere he went. Right. But it was just interesting to, what was it, 4 or 5 days later for him to go, this race for me, for us, is over.
But I think, one of the things we had, just a bunch of polls showing it going to be close, and Romney hadn't even put $2.9 million in commercials he was going to run, and if he had lost the election, I mean, obviously he has a big future. Nobody denies that, but losing your own state twice. Go ahead.
Right. No, I think he met his Waterloo at Gettysburg. Santorum did. I think there was sort of a coming together of a number of different things at one time. You had this, gone nuclear ad by Romney actually rolling out that very day. A
lot of negative commercials.
And you had a lot of polls. Yours and others, saying he was not looking good for Pennsylvania, and you had a personal health crisis for him with his daughter.
So you think all of that just combined, and now the big question is, Romney, I don't know yet if he's going to run commercials. I haven't seen any, but he's got to, Santorum's still on the ballot, right? So he's got to win. He's got to Romney still has to put something of a campaign on here. He doesn't want to have kind of Santorum. We'll vote for Santorum just because he's the hometown boy. I mean, there's still that serious element, right? Either one of you.
Right. Well, I think the big question is, will anybody turn out now? And that's going to affect races all the way down the
Turnout a problem here, right?
Yeah, that's what a lot of analysts. One analyst I spoke to yesterday said that the other thing that was interesting was after both of these events, the supporters who were at the Santorum, suspension announcement in Gettysburg, the supporters who were in the Lancaster event when he kind of gave his final, sealing up his staunch conservative reputation. What you didn't see in the crowd was a bunch of people going, well, time to set our sights on Romney. You did not see that. You saw a bunch of people going, I don't know what to say.
That's a huge challenge for Romney, right? I mean, he's got to work hard to get that particular group of voters, evangelicals, born again, folk, rural Republicans. That remains that's a challenge for him. I mean, Obama has his challenges, but Romney has.
But he's got to go for the Santorum voters, but he also has to look to the independents, moderates who might.
Gee, I guess what newspaper covers a lot of suburban voters in the state, right?
Yes, ours.
The Philadelphia Inquirer. Yeah. Well, look, a great update. Thanks for coming on. All right, coming up soon, we got a Democratic and Republican lawmaker. My goal is to get them to agree on one thing. No, I'm only kidding. No, I'm not. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, joining me is Representative Stan Saylor. He's the majority whip in the House, and Eugene DePasquale. He represents York, mostly York, is that right?
Yeah, central part of York County.
Central part of York County. All right. Now, I know what I can get you to agree on. You both love York County.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I told you I was going to work on one. All right, Stan, you're in the majority. Look, you all have been debating tax reform. We have been through this for 40 years, as we know. Property taxes, school district property taxes, the most onerous. We both agree, right? Right. Talk about at least a couple of the proposals that you all are debating, and then we can get into whether they're likely to pass.
Sure. You have Representative Jim Cox's bill, which is 1776. That bill is one that goes to sales tax. It does have a little bit of income tax in it. That would completely eliminate property taxes.
Raise sales and income tax.
Right.
Okay, that's one option.
That's one option. Representative Seth Gross, and now Cox's bill, 1776, is a statewide tax increase.
Right.
Right. Representative Grove's bill is a local, where you would decide school district by school district and county by county as to how to eliminate and what the tax rates would be. So it's more local control.
Would they use maybe a county sales tax and use that to make up for the property tax?
Absolutely. Along with a personal income tax as well would be allowed under the bill.
Oh, a personal income tax. So they're sort of the two. Now, do you have a choice here?
You have.
I mean, do you personally have a choice?
My personal opinion is I'll vote for either of them. I'm supportive of. It's so antiquated. We have got to do something about property taxes. We've been talking, as you said, 40 years.
40 years. Yeah.
It's not the way to pay for education.
Well, okay, two bills. I mean, which one of those do you support, or both?
Well, like Stan, I would support both, but I would prefer, and I think Stan is in the same ballpark, we would rather see them eliminated, meaning the school tax.
Right.
But the last time we ran that, I was one of only 10 Democrats that voted for it, but we only had 47 votes. So clearly, you have to look at the numbers, too. You got to be able to get something passed. The biggest issue for us in York County is not just the school tax, but also the school funding formula, because York County is growing
problem.
Every school district, including York City.
So the point here, just to be clear for our viewers, is that there's a redistribution of the money after it's appropriated to each school district on a formula, and then some districts get more and some districts get less, and that's what you're concerned about, right?
School districts in York County based from the 1991 school funding law, which hasn't really been adjusted since then, we really get hurt. Yeah. That's why our school tax is worse.
Stan, I want to ask you this question. So let's look at it this way. Statewide, we could say reduce or eliminate all school property taxes and raise the income tax a bit, or raise the sales tax a bit, or remove some of the items that are exempt from the sales tax. That's more controversial. You get into food and clothing. Go ahead.
Well, and as Eugene said about the whole issue of the key is the formula. It really is. Because either way, you get to an unfairness in distribution of money. And that's why there's a lawsuit now being filed in Commonwealth Court. But the thing is, in 1991, Democrats and Republicans who were in charge in Harrisburg all came from school districts that had no growth or were losing population. So York, Lancaster, Dauphin, Cumberland, all of central PA, and a lot of counties like Chester County, Bucks County, Montgomery County, they all lost in that because we're not, every time we add 100 students, we get no more dollars. But if you lose 100 students, you keep your money.
All right, now, I want to get to a couple other subjects, but look, 40 years this debate, I'll start with you. Is it going to get done?
Look, if we say no, then we're conceding the battle. In central Pennsylvania, we just have to keep forging ahead because I'm going to say yes. Yes for this reason. Maybe not this term, but it's eventually going to happen because the system is not sustainable in the long term.
Do you agree?
We're going to bring it up for a vote in May. And we're going to force members to make a choice in May and get it done. And it's my hope that we'll bring up several bills and let legislators make their choice.
Gee, this is embarrassing. You're both agreeing on this, on both. We're going to run to a break. We have to pay our bills. You know, like you guys have to worry about taxes. We have to pay. We come back. Big item about reducing the size of the legislature. Is that good or is that bad? If we have some time, then maybe we'll get into whether you think the budget will be done on time and whether it's likely to stick to the numbers that Governor Corbett recommended. All right, we'll go to a break. When we come back, does the size of the Pennsylvania legislature matter? They'll tell us.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Representative Saylor and Representative DePasquale. Gee, I've got him to agree on so much, I don't know if I want to continue, but all right, reduce the size of the legislature. For it or against it, why is it a good or a bad idea?
For it in two reasons. Number one is we're making so many cuts in so many other areas because of the nature of the economy and state tax revenues that people, I think, want to see the legislature follow suit. And so this would contain costs of the legislature. That's number one. But even more importantly going forward, I've just found that I admittedly am not someone that when I first entered the legislature would have cast that vote. I would have voted no, but now voted yes. So I think it's easier to get stuff done.
Yeah, by the way, what the constitutional amendment, it passed the House, right? And it would reduce the size of the House by 50 votes, 50 seats. So it'd go from 203 to 153. See, I got it right. Stan, good idea, bad idea. Now, if you tell me a good idea, I'm throwing both you guys off the program. Good idea.
It is a good idea.
All right.
I've been a supporter of that for a while, and Eugene's said exactly why it's a good idea. But, you know, people are also looking, when we're cutting things, as Eugene said, to hold the legislature accountable. We have done, in the past year, a lot of things for accountability in the House. We've voted this bill, now it goes to the Senate. But we have now eliminated state cars for legislators. Legislators now are going to have to pay have been paying part of their health care costs, which is something else that needed to get done. So I think Democrats and Republicans are coming together to say it's time for us to be held accountable, and we're trying to meet the needs of what the voters are saying we need to be accountable for.
You know what? I'm going to move away from this and ask you guys a question. Again, I'll start with Eugene. You know, there's a lot of polarization we read about and hear about, and you guys had big differences over. We don't need to get into it, you know, but you had differences over voter ID. You had differences over, you know, the whole business of testing before an abortion. I hate to use the term, I won't get into it. But do you get the sense that you're getting a little less partisan, that you're finding some things to work on?
I think, in Stan and myself and others in the legislature, Republican and Democrat, I think there's a difference between disagreeing and having a vigorous debate and making it personal.
Well, you can have a vigorous debate. Nothing wrong with that.
I think the public demands that. We should.
Absolutely.
I mean, these are contentious issues, and you should thoroughly debate them. But there's a difference between doing that and making it personal. I think there's been a real conscious effort, at least from the House side of things, to try to make it less personal. We have a lot of tough issues, but who you arguing against today could be your ally tomorrow, and you got to remember that.
But I mean, it was often said that, you know, when I started, sort of covering the legislature, following it, that there was a lot of mingling. You know, you'd go to dinner together with D's and R's, and you would, you know, have social events. And then people said, well, that's not, you know, as true as it used to be. Is your sense the same as his, that you might be moving beyond some of that?
I think we're getting back to that used to be here in Pennsylvania. I know it's still bad in Washington,
sure.
But I've formed a lot of friendship across the aisle, you know, and to get things done, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you need votes on the other side of the aisle many times to get it done, and I think more and more members are realizing that than had in the past.
Right.
And depending sometimes, it's also on your leaders. Your leaders help determine the partisanship and the debates that go on the floor. So it's a really key for both parties to elect good leaders who, in Washington, I have a problem with the leaders because I don't think they encourage reaching across the aisle. Right. Here in Harrisburg, I think the leaders of both parties are now trying to reach across the aisle and keep things not as inflammatory.
Yeah, the key is you have to keep talking. Yeah. That's the key. I mean, it shouldn't, that the wall that separates the Republicans and Democrats on the House floor shouldn't be the Berlin Wall.
Yeah. Well, that's true. And the other thing is that, I mean, I think personal relationships matter. I mean, there used to be this, you know, we used to talk about Ronald Reagan used to say, well, Tip O'Neill would come over and we'd, you know, sit around and I guess have a beer. I don't know what they were drinking. Right. But, you know, they would get together, and even though they could, you know, fight like crazy, they got along and they could reach out to each other in ways that matter. And, you know, when we lose that, I think the voters, and as a pollster, I mean, they don't like this rancor and bitterness. They don't care if you disagree,
right.
You know, as Gene points out. Well, let me just go back to this other issue look, I don't know that it's going to make you more effective if you reduce the size. I understand your arguments. We do hear that rural lawmakers complain that now you're an urban guy. Right. You know, you represent an urban district. You're not. You represent a rural district, right?
Rural suburban.
I mean, is this going to matter in rural districts where the district size will be bigger and they'll have to run around? They don't. Go ahead. I'll start with you.
Well, today with communications, I get 300 emails a day. I don't get the letters I used to get. I still get a lot of letters in the mail, but the communications system today in this state and across this nation is different. So people aren't looking necessarily run into my district office to see me every chance they get. Right. So I don't think it makes a difference.
How about you?
I think the same thing as Stan. I mean, people have cell phones, emails, I mean, Twitter, Facebook. The communication system that we have compared to 20 or 30 years ago, I think this would have been a real drain on personal touch. Now, I mean, even in an urban district, very few people actually drive to my district office to meet with me.
We have just a couple of minutes left. Are you going to get the budget done on time? I mean, you know how important.
Yeah, it will be done on time.
Gee, and do you think it's going to be? You're in the minority here, so you're. I don't know, but. Probably stick pretty close to what the governor recommended. It may get tweaked, right?
Yeah, my sense is, I agree with Stan. I think it'll get done on time. But look, I think that there's some real challenges in this budget. One of the good signs we're seeing, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, is we're starting to see revenue collection starting to creep back up. Right. We're not going to be at pre-recession levels. We understand that. Right. But that will help mitigate some of the cuts that everyone agrees are very tough in this budget.
We have about 30 seconds left. Go ahead.
If we were to make up the $7 billion that the federal government took away or just went away, we would have to raise taxes on a person making $50,000 a year, $1,200 to make up for that loss of federal dollars. So, you know, that's just not reasonable.
And we know there'll be no tax hike. That's the one thing we know. All right, as always, thanks for watching this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well.